When my husband Marcus tried to sell our house behind my back, he thought I was just another naive housewife who would crumble under pressure. What he did not expect was for me to show up at the auction with a briefcase full of documents and a microphone in my hand. The 150 people gathered there expected to see a bitter divorce battle, maybe some tears and shouting. Instead, I exposed the web of lies, fraud, and betrayal that had been destroying our community for years. What happened next turned every single person in that room against him, including his own mother. This is the story of how one auction day changed everything, and why Marcus Anderson will never set foot in our town again. But before we continue, check if you are already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? My name is Camila Anderson, and I am 34 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage with Marcus, my husband of 9 years. We lived in a beautiful colonial house in Millfield, Massachusetts, the same house where we planned to raise our children and grow old together. The white picket fence, the rose garden I had cultivated for 5 years, the oak tree where we had carved our initials during our 2nd anniversary. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning when I came home early from my job at the local elementary school where I teach 3rd grade. I had forgotten my lesson plans and needed to pick them up before the afternoon parent conference. As I walked through our front door, I heard Marcus on the phone in his home office, speaking in a voice I had never heard before. "Listen, Robert, the house will be on the market by Friday. She does not need to know anything until after the papers are signed. By the time she figures out what is happening, it will be too late to stop it." There was a pause, then laughter that made my blood run cold. "Trust me, my wife is not smart enough to understand real estate law. She is just a small-town teacher who thinks love conquers everything." I stood frozen in our hallway, surrounded by family photos that suddenly felt like lies hanging on the wall. The wedding picture where Marcus promised to honor and cherish me, the vacation photos from our trip to Maine last summer, the Christmas morning shots where we looked so happy opening presents under our tree. The beauty of it is that the house is technically in both our names, but I have power of attorney for all financial decisions. She signed that document years ago when we got the mortgage, thinking it was just standard paperwork. She has no idea what she actually signed. His voice carried the satisfaction of someone who believed he had outsmarted everyone around him. I carefully backed out of the house, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the neighbors could hear it. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what I had just discovered. My husband of 9 years was planning to sell our home without telling me. But more than that, he was doing it in a way that suggested I had no legal recourse. That night at dinner, Marcus acted completely normal. He asked about my day, complained about his work at the insurance company, and even suggested we watch our favorite show together. I played along, smiling and nodding, while inside I felt like I was drowning. Every word he spoke felt like another betrayal. Every kiss goodnight felt like a lie. But I am not the naive small-town teacher he thinks I am. I may teach 8-year-olds during the day, but I also have a master's degree in education, administration, and a minor in business law that I earned during summer sessions over the past 3 years. Marcus never paid attention to my studies, dismissing them as cute hobbies that kept me busy. As he slept peacefully beside me that night, I made a decision that would change both of our lives forever. The next morning, I called in sick to school for the first time in 2 years. While Marcus went to work, believing his secret was safe, I drove straight to the Millfield County Courthouse. The records office was busy with lawyers and real estate agents, but I waited patiently in line, clutching a notepad and trying to look more confident than I felt. "I need to see all documents related to 325 Maple Street," I told the clerk, giving her our address. Specifically, any power of attorney agreements, mortgage documents, and recent filing requests. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, looked at me with concern. "Honey, are you the homeowner? You look a little upset." "I am Camila Anderson. My name is on the deed, and I think my husband might be trying to sell our house without my knowledge." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like admitting to a crime I had not committed. What I discovered in those files made me physically sick. Marcus had not just planned to sell our house, he had been planning it for months, maybe even years. The power of attorney document I had signed was not standard mortgage paperwork. It was a comprehensive financial power of attorney that gave him the right to make any decision regarding our shared property without my consent or even my knowledge. But that was not the worst part. As I dug deeper into the public records, I found something that made my hands shake with anger. Marcus had already taken out a second mortgage on our house 6 months ago. $50,000 that I knew nothing about. Money that was supposedly used for home improvements and business investments. I looked around our house that evening with new eyes. There were no $50,000 worth of improvements. Our kitchen was the same. Our bathrooms unchanged. Our roof still had the same missing shingles from last winter's storm. So where had the money gone? I spent the next 3 days conducting my own investigation. I called our bank pretending to need account information for tax purposes. I discovered Marcus had opened a separate business account that I knew nothing about. I followed him after work twice, watching as he stopped at a small office building downtown that housed something called Golden Opportunities Investment Group. On Friday afternoon, I finally got the courage to walk into that office building. The directory showed Golden Opportunities on the 3rd floor. When I got off the elevator, I found a small reception area with expensive furniture and a young woman behind a desk who looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine rather than a small-town investment office. "I am looking for information about Golden Opportunities," I said, trying to sound casual. "My husband, Marcus Anderson, mentioned you might have some good investment options." The receptionist's face lit up with recognition. "Oh, Marcus. He is one of our best clients. Are you thinking about joining his investment group? He has made some really smart moves with us over the past year." My heart sank. Investment group. Oh yes, he started his investment group with us about 8 months ago. He has been bringing in new investors every month. Such a charming man, and so good at explaining complex financial concepts to regular people who want to grow their money. I left that office building knowing that my marriage was not just over, but that I had been living with a stranger who was potentially running some kind of investment scheme using our house as collateral. That weekend, while Marcus played golf with his usual Saturday morning group, I transformed into a detective. I had always been good at research, a skill that served me well in creating lesson plans and educational programs. Now, I was using those same skills to uncover the truth about my own life. I started with our computer. Marcus had always been careless with passwords, using the same one for everything, his birth year combined with his mother's maiden name. It took me 15 minutes to access his email accounts, his online banking, and his social media profiles that I had never seen before. What I found was a carefully constructed web of lies that went back to years. Marcus had been presenting himself as a successful investment advisor to people in our community. He had created professional-looking brochures, a fake website, and had been hosting investment seminars at the local community center. The same community center where I had volunteered for the annual fundraiser, where I knew every family and every story. He was targeting retirees, promising them guaranteed returns of 15 to 20% on their investments. People like Mrs. Henderson, our 73-year-old neighbor, who had invested her late husband's life insurance money. People like Tom Rodriguez, who ran the local hardware store and had invested his retirement savings, hoping to help pay for his daughter's college education. The worst part was reading the emails between Marcus and his victims. He was not just taking their money, he was building relationships with them. He remembered their grandchildren's names, asked about their health problems, sent birthday cards. He made them feel like family while he systematically stole from them. According to the records I found, Marcus had collected over $200,000 from 12 different families in our town. The money was supposed to be invested in low-risk, high-return opportunities that he claimed to have special access to through his connections in Boston. But there were no investments. The money was being used to pay earlier investors just enough to keep them happy, while the rest went into Marcus's personal accounts. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, and our house was his insurance policy. When it inevitably collapsed, he planned to sell the house and disappear with whatever money he could grab. I printed every email, every bank statement, every fake document I could find. By Sunday night, I had a 3-inch thick folder of evidence that painted a picture of financial fraud, betrayal, and criminal activity that would destroy the lives of people I cared about. But I also found something else. The auction notice. Marcus had already filed the paperwork to auction our house. The sale was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10 o'clock on the courthouse steps. 3 days away. I sat in our living room that night, looking at Marcus as he watched television, completely oblivious to what I had discovered. He was eating the dinner I had cooked, sitting in the chair I had picked out, in the house I had helped buy, surrounded by the life we had built together, and he was planning to destroy all of it for money. That was when I decided that showing up at the auction would not be enough. I was going to make sure that everyone in our town knew exactly who Marcus Anderson really was. Monday morning, I requested a personal day from school and drove to Springfield to meet with a lawyer. I had chosen Rebecca Martinez, a family attorney who specialized in financial fraud cases. Her office was in a converted Victorian house, with law books lining every wall and the kind of serious atmosphere that made me feel like my situation was finally being taken seriously. "Señora Anderson," she said after reviewing all my documentation, "what your husband is doing is not just morally wrong. It is criminal. This is securities fraud, wire fraud, and elder abuse. The people he is targeting could lose their life savings." "Can you stop the auction?" I asked, getting straight to the point. "I can file an emergency injunction, but it will take time, and he might find ways around it. However, there is another option." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "You could let the auction proceed and use it as the perfect opportunity to expose him publicly. With this much evidence, and with all his victims likely to be present, you could turn his own plan against him." The idea was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. "What do you mean?" "Auctions are public events. Anyone can speak. If you show up with this evidence and present it publicly in front of all the people he has been it would not only stop the sale but also ensure that criminal charges are filed immediately. The district attorney would have no choice but to act with this many witnesses present." I spent the rest of that day making copies of everything, organizing the evidence into clear categories, and preparing what I hoped would be the most important presentation of my life. I contacted a local process server to ensure that Marcus would be served with divorce papers immediately after the auction. I also reached out to a local news reporter who had covered financial fraud cases in the past. Tuesday was the hardest day. I had to go back to teaching, had to pretend everything was normal while Marcus continued his charade. He even mentioned the auction casually over dinner. "I might have some business to take care of Thursday morning," he said, cutting his steak with the same knife I had watched him use for 9 years. "Some paperwork related to our investments." "Our investments?" I asked, testing him. "Well, my investments. You know how you get confused by financial stuff? Honey, I handle all that so you do not have to worry about it." I nodded and smiled, the same way I had been doing for years, whenever he dismissed my intelligence or my capabilities. But this time I was counting the hours until I could show him exactly how confused I really was. Wednesday night, I barely slept. I went over my presentation dozens of times, checking every fact, every date, every dollar amount. I had organized the evidence into a timeline that would be easy for everyone to follow. I had prepared answers for questions I thought Marcus might ask. I had even practiced my voice projection, knowing I would need to speak loudly enough for everyone at the courthouse to hear me clearly. Marcus slept peacefully beside me, probably dreaming about whatever life he thought he would build with his stolen money. I wondered if he ever thought about the families he was destroying, or if he simply saw them as means to an end. As dawn broke on Thursday morning, I got dressed in my best professional outfit, the navy blue suit I wore to parent conferences and school board meetings. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked determined, fierce, and ready for war. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, typical October weather for Marcus left early, claiming he had meetings all day and might not be home until evening. He kissed me goodbye the same way he had every morning for 9 years, completely unaware that it would be the last time he would ever touch me. I waited 30 minutes after he left, then loaded my car with 3 boxers of evidence, a portable microphone I had borrowed from school, and a folding table I planned to use as a makeshift presentation station. The drive to the courthouse took 15 minutes, but it felt like the longest journey of my life. When I arrived at 9:30, there were already about 40 people gathered on the courthouse steps. I recognized most of them, neighbors, community members, and unfortunately, several of Marcus's victims who probably had no idea why they were there. Mrs. Henderson stood near the front, leaning on her walker and looking confused. Tom Rodriguez was there with his wife Maria, both of them scanning the crowd nervously. Marcus was there too, standing with a man I recognized as Robert Chun, a local real estate agent. Marcus was wearing his best suit and had the confident smile he always wore when he thought he was in control of a situation. He was shaking hands with people, making small talk, acting like the charming community member everyone thought he was. I parked across the street and watched for a few minutes, trying to calm my nerves. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I might throw up. But then I saw Mrs. Henderson stumble slightly, and Tom Rodriguez put his arm around his wife as she wiped tears from her eyes. And I remembered why I was there. At exactly 10 o'clock, the auctioneer called for attention. Marcus stepped forward, looking proud and confident. The auctioneer began reading the legal description of our house, the house where I had planned to grow old, the house that Marcus was selling to pay for his escape from the crimes he had committed. "Do we have an opening bid?" the auctioneer called. That was when I stepped forward, carrying my microphone and my first box of evidence. "Before any bids are placed," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the courthouse steps thanks to the microphone, "I think everyone here should know exactly what they are bidding on, and exactly who Marcus Anderson really is." The crowd turned toward me, and I saw Marcus's face go completely white. He had not expected me to be there, and he certainly had not expected me to have a microphone and a presentation prepared. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, "my name is Camila Anderson. I am Marcus's wife, and this is our house he is trying to sell. But before you consider placing any bids, you need to know that this auction is not what it appears to be." I could see people in the crowd exchanging glances, and I noticed several of them taking out their phones to record what was happening. "This house is being sold to cover up one of the most extensive financial fraud schemes our community has ever seen." The murmur that went through the crowd was like electricity. Marcus tried to interrupt, stepping toward me with his hands raised in a calming gesture that I had seen him use hundreds of times before. "Now, Camila, honey, you are confused. This is just a simple business transaction. You do not understand the complexities involved here." His voice had the patronizing tone that I had learned to hate over the years. "I understand perfectly, Marcus," I replied, opening my first box of evidence. "What I understand is that you have been running a Ponzi scheme targeting elderly residents of our community. For the past 2 years, I held up a thick stack of papers. These are bank records showing that my husband has collected over $200,000 from 12 families in our town, promising them guaranteed investment returns of 15 to 20%. The crowd was completely silent now. I could see Mrs. Henderson looking confused, and Tom Rodriguez had gone pale. "Señora Henderson," I called out, looking directly at our elderly neighbor, "you gave Marcus $15,000 last spring, right? Money from your husband's life insurance policy." She nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. "He said it would help me pay for my medications and home care. He promised I would get 20% returns every year." "Tom Rodriguez," I continued, turning to the hardware store owner, "you invested your retirement savings with Marcus 6 months ago. $25,000 that was supposed to help pay for your daughter's college education." Tom's face crumpled. He said it was a sure thing. He showed me paperwork, official-looking documents. He said he had special connections in Boston. Marcus was trying to get closer to me, but the crowd had formed a natural barrier between us. "Camila, you are misunderstanding the situation. These are legitimate investments. Just because you do not understand finance does not mean I do not understand finance," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Let me show everyone exactly how well I understand finance." I pulled out a laptop and connected it to a portable projector I had set up on my folding table. Within minutes, I had Marcus's bank records displayed on the side wall of the courthouse for everyone to see. "This is Marcus's personal account," I announced. "Notice the deposits from Mrs. Henderson on March 15th, $15,000. Notice the deposit from the Rodriguez family on April 3rd, $25,000. Notice deposits from the Nakamura family, the Thompson family, the Williams family." I clicked to the next screen. "Now notice what happened to that money. It was not invested. It was transferred to Marcus's personal accounts, used to pay earlier investors, small amounts to keep them satisfied, and used to fund Marcus's lifestyle." The crowd was getting restless. I could hear angry voices starting to rise. "But here is the most important part," I continued. "Marcus took out a $50,000 second mortgage on our house 6 months ago. He forged my signature on the documents. He was planning to sell our house, take whatever money he could get, and disappear before anyone realized their investments were never real. Marcus was no longer trying to appear calm and confident. His face was red with anger, and he was pushing through the crowd trying to reach me. "You have no right to air our private business like this," he shouted. "These people do not need to hear about our marital problems." Marital problems? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus, this is not about our marriage. This is about the fact that you are a criminal who has been stealing from our neighbors and friends." I clicked to the next screen of evidence. Let me show everyone just how elaborate this scheme was. The projection now showed Marcus's fake website, complete with professional photos and testimonials from supposed satisfied investors. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Golden Opportunities Investment Group. This website claims to be a legitimate investment firm with offices in Boston and New York. The testimonials are from actors Marcus hired online. The office address in Boston. It is a mailbox at a UPS store." Several people in the crowd gasped. Mrs. Henderson was crying now, and Tom Rodriguez looked like he might be sick. "But Marcus was smart," I continued. "He knew that eventually people would want to see returns on their investments. So, he created what is called a Ponzi scheme. He used money from new investors to pay small returns to earlier investors, making everyone think their investments were growing." I displayed a chart showing the flow of money between different accounts. "Señora Henderson, remember when you received that $500 check last month? Marcus told you it was your first quarterly return, right? That money came from the Rodriguez family's investment, not from any legitimate profits." The anger in the crowd was palpable now. People were shouting questions, demanding answers, and Marcus was looking around desperately like a trapped animal. "And Tom," I said, turning back to the hardware store owner, "remember that $1,000 check you got 2 weeks ago? That came from the Nakamura family's retirement savings." Tom Rodriguez broke away from the crowd and stepped toward Marcus, his face twisted with fury. "You son of a bitch! That was our daughter's college fund. She is supposed to start school next year." Other victims were starting to recognize each other and piece together the scope of the fraud. The elderly Mrs. Williams, whom I had not even noticed in the crowd, stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. "Marcos Anderson, you helped me invest my Social Security, disability back $8,000. You said it would help me afford my medications." Her voice was shaking with rage and betrayal. "I trusted you. I invited you to my granddaughter's birthday party." This was the moment I had been preparing for, when the community would see Marcus not as the charming neighbor and successful businessman, but as the predator he really was. "The total amount stolen," I announced, "is $237,000 from 12 families. And, if this auction had proceeded, Marcus would have disappeared with another $150,000 from the sale of our house." The crowd was no longer just angry. They were furious and heartbroken. These were not just financial victims. These were people Marcus had befriended, families he had shared meals with, neighbors he had helped with yard work and home repairs. The betrayal was personal and devastating. Marcus made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. "Listen, everyone. My wife is having some kind of mental breakdown. She has been acting erratically for weeks. These documents are taken out of context. I can explain everything if you just give me a chance." "Mental breakdown," I repeated, my voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "Let me show everyone exactly how mentally stable I am." I pulled out my final piece of evidence, a letter from the Massachusetts Securities Division and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. 3 days ago, I submitted a formal complaint to state and federal authorities, along with all the evidence I have presented here today. This letter confirms that a full investigation has been opened and that arrest warrants are being prepared. The crowd fell silent. Marcus's face went from red to completely white. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have documentation showing that Marcus has been planning this escape for months. He has already transferred money to offshore accounts, booked flights to non-extradition countries, and created false identification documents." I held up printouts of travel confirmations and bank transfers. Marcus Anderson was planning to disappear next week, leaving all of you with worthless promises and empty accounts. The elderly Mr. Nak, whom I had not noticed before, stepped out of the crowd. His voice was quiet but filled with dignity. "My wife and I saved for 40 years to retire comfortably. We gave you our trust and our money because you seemed like such a good man. How could you do this to people who welcomed you into their homes?" Marcus looked around the crowd, and I could see the exact moment he realized that his charm and manipulation would not work anymore. Every face looking back at him was filled with disgust, anger, and betrayal. "Camila," he said, trying one last time to appeal to me directly, "we can work this out. We can pay everyone back. We can fix this together. Together. Primera. La UGD. Marcus, I found emails where you called me too stupid to understand basic finance. I found messages where you told your conspirators that I was just a small-town teacher who would never figure out what was really happening. You planned to steal our house and leave me with nothing while you disappeared with money stolen from our neighbors." The crowd was pressing closer now, and I could see that several people had called the police. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. "But here is why you never understood about me, Marcus," I said, stepping closer to him for the first time. "I may be a small-town teacher, but I am also a woman who will not let anyone hurt the people I care about. And these people," I gestured to the crowd around us, "are my community. They are my students, grandparents, my neighbors, my friends." The police arrived just as I finished speaking, their sirens cutting through the tension that had built on the courthouse steps. But they were not the only ones arriving. I spotted the news reporter I had contacted, along with a camera crew from the local television station. Marcus's public exposure was about to become even more comprehensive. Detective Sarah Murphy, whom I had met with yesterday to coordinate this moment, approached through the crowd. "Mrs. Anderson, thank you for your cooperation with our investigation." Marcus tried to run. He actually turned and attempted to push through the crowd of his victims and escape down the street, but Tom Rodriguez and 2 other men blocked his path. And within seconds, Detective Murphy had him in handcuffs. "Marcos Anderson, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit theft," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You have the right to remain silent." As the detective read Marcus's rights, I turned to address the crowd one final time. "I know that many of you have lost money that you cannot afford to lose. I know that your trust has been shattered by someone you considered a friend. But I want you to know that this investigation will recover as much of your money as possible, and Marcus will face the full consequences of his crimes." Mrs. Henderson was still crying, and I walked over to put my arm around her. "Señora, quiero..." "Henderson, the FBI will freeze all of Marcus's accounts. Much of your money is still recoverable." "But how did you know?" she asked through her tears. "How did you figure it all out?" "Because I pay attention," I replied. "Because I listen when people talk, and I notice when things do not add up." Marcus thought that being a teacher made me naive. But teaching actually taught me how to spot when someone is lying, how to research information, and how to protect the people I care about. The news reporter approached me with her microphone. "Mrs. Anderson, can you tell us how you uncovered this fraud scheme?" I looked directly into the camera, thinking about all the other small-town all the other wives who might be living with men they do not really know. I discovered that the person I was married to was not who I thought he was. When I found evidence of his crimes, I had 2 choices. I could protect myself quietly, or I could protect my entire community publicly. This was never just about my marriage or my house. This was about making sure that people who trusted Marcus Anderson would not lose their life savings while he escaped justice. Behind me, Marcus was being loaded into a police car. Before the door closed, he looked back at me with an expression of pure hatred. "This is not over, Camila," he shouted. "You have no idea what you have just done to your own life." I walked over to the police car and looked him directly in the eyes. "What I have done, Marcus, is make sure that you will never hurt anyone else the way you hurt these people. And as for my life, for the first time in years, I am excited to see what comes next." The courthouse steps were chaos for another hour. Police officers were taking statements from victims. Reporters were interviewing community members. And FBI agents who had arrived from the Springfield office were collecting the evidence I had prepared. Detective Murphy approached me as I was packing up my presentation materials. "Mrs. Anderson, I have to say that your investigation was more thorough than what many professional investigators achieve. Have you ever considered a career change? I laughed for the first time in weeks. Right now, I am just focused on getting through this and helping my community recover. But as the crowd began to disperse, something unexpected happened. The people Marcus had victimized began approaching me, not with anger or blame, but with gratitude. Tom Rodriguez was the first. Camila, I do not know how to thank you. If you had not stopped this auction, if you had not exposed what he was doing, Maria and I would have lost everything, and we never would have known why. Mrs. Henderson took my hands in her frail ones. Honey, you saved what is left of my retirement. But more than that, you showed me that there are still good people in this world who will fight for what is right. One by one, the victims thanked me. But, more importantly, they began talking to each other, forming the kind of community support network that would help them heal from Marcus's betrayal. The FBI agent in charge, Agent Rebecca Torres, explained what would happen next. Mr. Anderson will be held without bail given his flight risk. We will be freezing all his accounts, including offshore accounts, and beginning asset recovery immediately. The house auction is obviously cancelled, and Mrs. Anderson, you will retain full ownership of your property. What about the second mortgage he took out? I asked. Since your signature was forged, that debt will be considered fraudulent and will be voided. However, we will need you to continue cooperating with our investigation. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself surrounded by neighbors and community members who were seeing me differently than they ever had before. I had always been Marcus's wife, or the elementary school teacher. Now I was the woman who had stood up to fraud and corruption, who had risked everything to protect her community. But the most meaningful moment came when my principal, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, arrived at the courthouse. Camila, she said, I heard what happened on the news, and I drove straight over here. I want you to know that the school board is incredibly proud of what you have done today. You have shown exactly the kind of integrity and courage we want in our educators. I hope this will not create problems for my job, I said, suddenly worried about the publicity. Problems. Camila, we want to offer you the position of assistant principal that is opening next year. What you did today shows leadership skills and moral courage that we need in our administration. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt tears of joy instead of anger or fear. Over the next several weeks, the full scope of Marcus's crimes became clear. The FBI investigation revealed that his scheme was even more extensive than I had originally discovered. He had been targeting victims in 3 different counties, and the total amount stolen was closer to $400,000. The investigation also uncovered Marcus's escape plan in detail. He had indeed been preparing to flee the country, with plane tickets to Brazil scheduled for the Monday after our house auction. He had been corresponding with criminals who specialized in helping financial fugitives disappear permanently. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was that I had not been his first victim. The FBI found evidence that Marcus had run similar schemes in 2 other states before moving to He had a pattern of marrying trusting women, using their stability and community connections to build credibility, then disappearing when his schemes collapsed, leaving his wives to face the consequences. Senora Anderson, Agent Torres explained during one of our meetings, your husband is what we call a serial financial predator. You were not just his wife. You were part of his cover story, his way of appearing trustworthy and stable to potential victims. This revelation was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant my entire marriage had been a lie from the very beginning. Liberating because it meant that nothing that had happened was my fault. The community response was overwhelming. Local businesses organized fundraising events for the elderly victims who had lost the most money. The bank worked with homeowners who were facing foreclosure because of their losses, and gradually, through the FBI's asset recovery efforts, most of the stolen money was returned to its rightful owners. Mrs. Henderson got back all but $2,000 of her investment. Tom Rodriguez recovered enough to still pay for his daughter's college education. The Nakamura family was able to keep their retirement plans on track, but beyond the money, something more important happened. Our community became stronger. People were more careful about investment opportunities, but they were also more connected to each other. The shared experience of Marcus's betrayal had brought neighbors together in ways that had not existed before. I found myself becoming an informal advisor to people who were approached with too good to be true investment opportunities. The detective skills I had developed during my investigation of Marcus became useful in helping others spot potential scams. My divorce was finalized quickly, with Marcus signing all papers from his jail cell where he was being held pending trial. I kept our house, all our shared assets, and most importantly, my maiden name. I legally changed back to Camila Rodriguez, honoring my family heritage that I had given up when I married Marcus. The teaching position turned into the assistant principal role that Dr. Walsh had promised, along with a significant salary increase that made it possible for me to keep the house and even begin renovating it into something that felt truly mine rather than a reminder of my failed marriage. Today marks exactly 1 year since the courthouse auction that changed my life forever. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all his victims. He will be 67 years old when he is released, too old and too well known to run the same schemes again. I am writing this from my home office, which used to be Marcus's den, where he planned his fraudulent activities. I have transformed it into a bright, comfortable space where I work on my administrative duties and plan educational programs for our school district. The house feels completely different now. I have repainted every room, replaced the furniture that reminded me of Marcus, and filled the space with photos of my students, my real friends, and my family. The rose garden is blooming better than ever, and I have added a vegetable garden where Marcus used to park his car. Mrs. Henderson visits twice a week. Now, we have tea on my front porch, and she tells me stories about her late husband and her grandchildren. She has recovered financially, but more importantly, she has recovered her trust in people. You know, Camila, she told me last week, what Marcus did was terrible, but what you did proved that good people still exist. Tom Rodriguez and I have become close friends. His daughter is now in her second year of college, studying criminal justice because she was inspired by how the investigation unfolded. She wants to protect people the way you protected us, Tom told me proudly. The most unexpected development has been my relationship with Detective Murphy. What started as professional cooperation during the investigation has grown into something deeper. Sarah is intelligent, honest, and shares my commitment to protecting people who cannot protect themselves. We are taking things slowly, but for the first time since my marriage ended, I am excited about the possibility of sharing my life with someone who truly respects and values me. My career has flourished in ways I never expected. The assistant principal position led to opportunities to speak at educational conferences about recognizing and reporting financial fraud. I have developed programs that teach students and their families how to identify scams and protect themselves from predators like Marcus. Last month, I received a letter from a teacher in Ohio who had attended one of my presentations. She had recognized signs of financial fraud in her own community and was able to alert authorities before anyone lost money. Your story gave me the courage to speak up, she wrote. You showed me that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. But perhaps the most meaningful change has been in my relationship with myself. For years, I had allowed Marcus to diminish my intelligence, my capabilities, and my worth. I had accepted his characterization of me as a simple small-town teacher who did not understand complex matters. Now, I know that being a teacher is not simple at all. It requires intelligence, empathy, observation skills, and the ability to communicate complex ideas clearly. Those same skills that helped me educate children also helped me uncover financial fraud and protect my community. I have learned that small-town values like trust and community support are not weaknesses to be exploited, but strengths to be protected. Marcus saw our community's trust as an opportunity for crime. I see it as something worth fighting for. The auction that was supposed to destroy my life instead became the foundation for rebuilding it. On that courthouse steps, surrounded by angry and heartbroken neighbors, I discovered who I really was underneath all the years of being Marcus's wife. I was someone who would not stay quiet when people were being hurt. I was someone who could conduct complex investigations and present evidence clearly. I was someone who could stand up to a man who had controlled and manipulated me for years. Most importantly, I was someone who would choose community welfare over personal comfort. If you are watching this, and you recognize something familiar in my story, if you suspect that someone in your life is not who they claim to be, trust your instincts. Pay attention to the details that do not add up. Ask questions that feel uncomfortable. Protect yourself and the people you care about. Marcus thought that my love for our community was a weakness he could exploit. He thought that my trust was naivety he could manipulate. He thought that my education was irrelevant to the real world. He was wrong about all of it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be silent. Sometimes justice comes not from waiting for someone else to act, but from standing up with evidence and courage and making the truth impossible to ignore. My name is Camila Rodriguez. I am 35 years old, and I am a proud small-town educator who helped bring down a financial predator. This is my story of how one auction day changed everything, and why I will never again underestimate the power of an ordinary person who refuses to accept injustice. Thank you for listening to my story. If this video helped you in any way, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you are watching from. And remember, you are stronger and more capable than anyone who tries to diminish you will ever understand. Trust yourself, protect your community, and never be afraid to stand up for what is right. The next story in our playlist will show you how one woman's investigation into her missing inheritance uncovered a conspiracy that reached all the way to City Hall. Click on the link that is showing now to watch what happened when she decided to fight back. Until next time, stay strong and stay vigilant.